The clergy's entanglements of passion.
A message online says, the biggest problem with Catholicism is that it doesn't allow priests to marry. Hearing this is quite astonishing, feeling like a voice detached from the realities of the world. Nowadays, with secular divorce rates exceeding half, there are actually people encouraging the clergy to join in this trend and wade into this murky water. This feels quite bizarre. Divorce among secular people is already a calamity. If clergy members were to divorce, it would absolutely be a religious tribulation to be etched in history. Considering the potential outcome for female clergy, it would likely be much the same. Therefore, I would rather address these together here and present several examples to illustrate this.
Ancient clergy needed marriage and family.
In a sense, the phenomenon of clerical marriage within the Christian faith is clearly another instance of secular indulgence. In this regard, one should not invoke the practices of ancient people to whitewash or embellish secularized behavior. For many, this would likely prick their conscience, as it has no inherent connection to ancient clerical marriage. Regarding the evaluation of clerical marriage, a rather significant viewpoint holds that, at best, it constitutes secular indulgence. At worst, it amounts to clerical corruption. Some argue that clergy in biblical times likely all had marriages, so the same should naturally apply today. However, this severely overlooks the differences in eras and only superficially emphasizes a certain outward appearance. Isn't this muddle-headed approach falling into the old trap of metaphysics? In ancient society, a social security system simply did not exist. Therefore, marriage and having children were akin to purchasing old age insurance. Clergy members were also human beings. Once they left home and devoted themselves wholeheartedly to church ministry, they would lose stable personal income and family support. When facing illness, old age, or death, without the support of family members, they would face an unsolvable predicament. Thus, their marriages and families, to a large extent, fulfilled the function of social security, providing clergy individuals with emotional comfort, financial support, medical care during illness, and care in their later years. Consequently, for ancient clergy, marrying and having children was, to some extent, indeed a helpless move driven by the harsh realities of survival. Modern society, however, has undergone earth-shattering changes. The Church possesses a comprehensive security system. Legitimate churches have established sound welfare systems, providing clergy with various forms of security such as healthcare, medical treatment, retirement benefits, and funeral arrangements. This has significantly reduced the clergy's dependence on family support, allowing them to focus more wholeheartedly on church ministry without excessive distraction from romantic entanglements and daily necessities. Discussions about the marriage of clergy cannot be divorced from the specific socio-historical context. In different eras, the significance of marriage for clergy members undoubtedly varies. On the contrary, in modern society, marriage and family for clergy members often represent more of a significant shackle. For instance, what happens if the relationship between husband and wife deteriorates? What if the children are unfilial? After all, in today's more developed societies, the divorce rate exceeds half. Moreover, rebellious children have become a serious social problem. These are societal phenomena, and clerical families are unlikely to remain completely unaffected.
Is clerical marriage corruption?
Some argue that, since modern churches have comprehensive social security systems, the clergy's birth, aging, illness, and death no longer depend on marriage and family for guarantee security. In that case, the positive and negative factors of such marriages would offset each other, likely rendering them superfluous and sometimes even detrimental. After all, the clergy and the secular world exist in an opposing, contradictory relationship. Therefore, a rather thought-provoking viewpoint suggests that Christian clergy marrying is inherently a form of corruption. The reasoning is, one cannot serve two masters wholeheartedly. Married clergy cannot dedicate themselves entirely to serving God. Once they indulge in worldly emotions and desires, their hearts become less pure. Historically, within Christianity, there has always been debate regarding whether clergy should marry. It's difficult to definitively say who is right or wrong. From the perspective of this question, the concerns mainly focus on two aspects. Marriage would divert the clergy's energy from wholeheartedly serving God, because they would need to spend more time and effort caring for their families. After marriage, clergy members need to bear the financial responsibilities of a family. This would inevitably lead them to be inclined to use church resources to meet their personal and family needs, thus leading to corruption. To ask clergy members to be both religious sages and role models, and also exemplary husbands and fathers, is absolutely to put them on the fire to roast, producing individuals who are transparently flawless in both the secular and religious realms, truly exceptional individuals. Some argue that clerical marriage equates to loss of bodily chastity, loss of professional integrity, and loss of sacrificial purity. These three losses of purity raise questions about clerical marriage from different levels. 1. Loss of bodily chastity. This view holds that clergy should remain celibate, dedicating their bodies entirely to God's work. Marriage involves worldly, animalistic desires, which would be seen as a defilement of this pure dedication. 2. Loss of professional integrity. This view emphasizes that clergy should wholeheartedly devote themselves to religious affairs, serving believers and the church. Marriage and family life require significant time and energy, which would naturally distract them from their focus on their faith, affecting their professionalism and level of dedication. For example, being available on call at any time, especially for administering sacraments late at night. 3. Loss of sacrificial purity. This view believes that the life of clergy should be one of sacrifice and dedication. Marriage means having a family and enjoying worldly happiness. This might be seen as abandoning complete self-sacrifice and diminishing their role as examples of God's servants. The red heifer sacrifice in the Old Testament emphasizes purity. These three losses of purity deeply express an idealized understanding of the role of clergy, emphasizing that they should transcend worldly entanglements and become paragons of complete devotion to their faith.
The predicament of clerical families.
Clergy are the engineers of human souls. Therefore, they themselves must first achieve perfection. Secular families can flaunt their wealth if they have it, but clerical families cannot. Once members of a clerical family show off their wealth, it will inevitably provoke rebellion among the congregation. This is because the wealth of clerical families comes from the generous donations of the faithful. If a clerical family exhibits ostentatious behavior, it will at least trigger the congregation's disgust and suspicion, and may even lead to rebellion. Possible manifestations include flaunting wealth is seen as greed and vanity, contrary to the humility, frugality, and spirit of dedication that clergy members should possess. The congregation will suspect how much of the church's donations is being used privately. After losing trust in the clergy, the congregation will reduce or even stop their financial support for the church, or even leave the church altogether. Different opinions will arise regarding the clergy's personal wealth, leading to internal friction within the church. Therefore, clerical families need to maintain a perfect standard of simplicity and low-key living in their material lives, avoiding any behavior that could be interpreted as showing off wealth. For some clergy and their families who are accustomed to a higher standard of living, this is like a permanent sentence of poverty: having money but not daring to spend it, having blessings but not daring to enjoy them. Family members will likely find it difficult to be lifelong ascetics, self-disciplined, and impoverished for their entire lives. Consequently, clerical family members who are unwilling to be permanent slaves will certainly constantly quarrel and demand that the clergy return to secular life. Being a perfect person is arduous and sometimes painful. Therefore, in secular Chinese history, there are only two widely recognized perfect individuals: Wang Yaming of the Ming Dynasty and Zheng Gofan of the Qing Dynasty. These two were revered by later generations because they possessed the three imperishables of establishing virtue, establishing merit, and establishing words. However, the price they and their families paid for this was likely unimaginable to ordinary people. For example, Zengofen's home and wife were no different from ordinary poor peasant households, completely inconsistent with Zengofen's image as a high-ranking official, a regional governor, and a trusted advisor to the emperor.
The pitfall of rebellious children.
In modern secular society, marriage and family face a series of acute challenges. The most prominent are high divorce rates and rebellious children. These problems, of course, also affect secularized clergy. In terms of marriage and family, they are no different from secular people. However, due to the special status of clergy, they are fundamentally unable to handle these issues, and find it difficult to achieve the best of both worlds, or remain untainted. Although clergy members have spiritual pursuits and a certain level of spiritual cultivation, they are essentially ordinary people, who will also face marital friction, communication barriers, and numerous overwhelming challenges in raising children. The crucial point is that their identity is overly sensitive. This makes dealing with family trivial matters even more difficult for them. Clergy are often seen as moral and spiritual role models. Their marriages and families are subject to higher standards of scrutiny. Once problems arise, the negative impact will have a multiplied amplifying effect on the church's reputation and the faith of believers. Clergy members should dedicate a significant amount of time and energy to serving the church. This will naturally create intense conflicts with their family roles as spouses and parents, exacerbating the alienation among family members. The church or believers may overly spiritualize the marital and family problems of the clergy, believing that the issues in clerical families are a sign of a lack of faith or an attack by the devil. The phenomenon of rebellious children has become a plague, a terrifying social hazard. Once clergy members also face such a predicament, they would probably just want to find a crack in the ground to hide in. The rebellious behavior of modern children shows a growing trend. This causes extreme distress for many families. Typical manifestations include disobedience, backtalking, ignoring family rules, school rules, and social norms, such as coming home late, not completing homework, violating discipline, deliberately doing things contrary to their parents' wishes, reduced communication, internet addiction, a tendency to be alone, emotional detachment, exposure to smoking, alcohol, and drugs, premature sexual activity, pursuit of thrill-seeking activities such as reckless driving, staying out all night, negative feelings towards school, truancy, lack of life goals, significant mood swings, proneness to irritability, anxiety, depression, sometimes accompanied by destructive behavior, and self-harm tendencies. Faced with these rebellious behaviors, as parents who are clergy, intervening is problematic, and not intervening is even more so. After all, heartfelt advice is ineffective. Corporal punishment is counterproductive. Either way, they are in the wrong. Once they encounter these troublesome and upsetting family problems, whether it's a breakdown in their relationship or rebellious children, clergy members will not have the composure or the freedom of secular people. They can only shed silent tears in their hearts. Now that the general principles have been discussed, it's time to provide an example to support the argument.
A pastor's love story.
In Richmond Hill, Ontario, Canada, stands the solemn St. Grace Presbyterian Church, where Pastor Michael's name is revered like the morning light. For years, he has been a spiritual beacon, guiding God's congregation. His sermons were impassioned, each word like a burning flame, warming every devout heart. To outsiders, he, his gentle and virtuous wife Rebecca, and their two angel-like, adorable children, were undoubtedly a model family, blessed by God. Rebecca was an indispensable pillar in the church's ministry, hailed as the pastor's most capable assistant, and a role model in the eyes of the believers. However, beneath this seemingly flawless facade of happiness, undercurrents surged, like a deep abyss, concealing unknown cracks. The relentless passage of time, like a fine file, gradually eroded the once solid foundation between Michael and Rebecca. Divergent life philosophies, cold and rigid communication styles, and increasingly distant future plans acted like three invisible chains tightly binding to hearts that were once closely intertwined. The pastor's heavy responsibilities, the never-ending church affairs, and the trivial daily routines of family life were like countless fine needles, constantly pricking their weary nerves, leaving them with no strength to tend to the barren wasteland of their emotions. Initially, they had tried to ignite faint sparks of communication, using compromise to mend the widening cracks. However, years of estrangement, like stubborn frost, had frozen the most tender parts of their hearts, leaving the rift like a torn wound, bleeding in the cold air. For the sake of their two innocent children, and to maintain the church's sacred and inviolable image, they had to wear masks of pretense, diligently playing the role of a loving couple. Yet, the souls beneath the masks groaned in endless alienation, like two distant, lonely islands yearning for a touch of warm connection. Finally, after countless long and painful nights, after countless desperate struggles in the depths of their souls, Michael and Rebecca made a difficult decision that would shake the entire church, to end their seemingly perfect marriage. When this news exploded in the church like thunder, everyone was plunged into disbelief and profound shock. Their eyes filled with bewilderment and disappointment, like those lost after the collapse of their faith. They could not imagine that the pastor who had once stood on the pulpit, passionately teaching them family values, had seen his own marriage reach the brink of collapse. The divorce process was undoubtedly a purgatorial ordeal for Michael and Rebecca. They not only had to endure the excruciating pain of emotional tearing, but also face the tidal wave of church public opinion, each sigh and each glance, like an invisible sharp blade, piercing their already wounded hearts. Michael was forced to temporarily leave the sacred pulpit, like a minstrel stripped of his soul. He could only lick his wounds alone, struggling to rebuild his crumbling spiritual world with the help of psychological counseling. The church's presbytery also urgently intervened, trying to steady the church's course in this storm, both guiding the broken couple and painstakingly considering the church's future direction to avoid the foundations of faith from being shaken. After the divorce, Michael and Rebecca did their best to jointly shoulder the responsibility of raising their children with a mature and responsible attitude. The tide of time slowly flowed, washing away the traces of the past. After a period of silence, Michael chose to restart his pastoral career in another unfamiliar community. He no longer avoided his past pain, but chose to face the fragility and complexity of human nature honestly. His sermons thus gained a deeper and more compassionate tone, better touching the souls struggling in life. Rebecca chose to stay in Richmond Hill, like a tree rooted in its native soil. She silently endured the shadows of the past, striving to rebuild her life on the broken ruins. Michael and Rebecca's story serves as a stark warning to everyone, cruelly reminding us that even pastors cloaked in a sacred aura are ultimately human beings, of flesh and blood. They do face various trials in life, including the seemingly unbreakable bonds of marriage and children. And a pastor's divorce storm can not only bring incalculable, tribulation-like impact to the church, but also leave an indelible shadow on his own pastoral career, like a shocking crack in the river of faith.
The awkwardness of female clergy.
The Catholic Church has consistently maintained a gender-differentiated approach towards clergy from other denominations. Seeking conversion, it shows some leniency towards married male clergy who can become Catholic priests, but not bishops. However, there is no such flexibility for female clergy who cannot become Catholic priests and are only offered other, more suitable positions. The issue of women holding clerical positions has long been a contentious topic in various religious traditions and modern social contexts. Arguments against women serving as clergy often stem from traditional gender role perceptions, specific interpretations of religious scriptures, and the maintenance of church authority and order. These viewpoints frequently emphasize the inappropriateness of women in clerical roles. Beyond these high-sounding, diplomatic pronouncements, the fundamental reason for opposing female clergy actually lies in the issue of female temperament, a private matter that cannot be voiced through official channels. An online statistic suggests that approximately half of the nuns who enter convents choose to return to secular life before taking their final vows of chastity. To describe it vividly, it's like this. Women are emotionally more fragile, more prone to impulsiveness, and sometimes act based on feelings. Especially when it comes to worldly temptations, their resistance is not strong enough To exaggerate a bit, it's as long as a handsome man calls, a nun will immediately elope with him. Female clergy, just like nuns, also have alarmingly high rates of returning to secular life. Therefore, to protect the Church's reputation, the Catholic Church has so far strictly refused to open up clerical positions to women. Loving beauty is a woman's nature. However, while secular women can put on makeup every day, it's not as convenient for women in religious orders. This is because going to the altar is not like going on stage. Excessive adornment can easily make handsome men among the congregation have inappropriate thoughts. If this still isn't clear enough, let me tell another true story.
A female pastor's emotional tale.
In a tranquil town in Ontario, Canada, the towering church steeple, like a devout hand pointing towards the heavens, bore witness to a young woman named Sarah. Her life's trajectory had once been closely intertwined with this sacred place. Sarah, having bathed in the light of the gospel since childhood, possessed a faith as deep-rooted as a rock. After graduating from university, she resolutely entered the solemn seminary. Eventually, adorned with a stole, she became a well-respected female pastor in the town. Her voice was as sweet as a clear spring, and her gaze radiated warmth. Like a blooming flower, she won the love of all the congregation. The threads of fate often intertwined silently and unexpectedly. During a sunny community volunteer event, Sarah encountered the handsome David. He was a talented engineer, with a personality as bright as summer, and a fiery gleam in his eyes. However, he rarely set foot inside the church doors, belonging more to the wider secular world. In the process of jointly dedicating their love, two originally parallel hearts began to feel each other's unique gravitational pull. David was captivated by Sarah's star-like brilliance, her kindness and wisdom, while Sarah was deeply attracted by David's sunshine-pure sincerity and his humor that could make her forget all her worries. The tide of time silently lapped at the shores of their hearts, and a fervent emotion that transcended friendship, like a new sprout breaking through the soil, quietly grew between them and flourished at an astonishing rate. They seemed to have endless words to share, and every moment spent together was like basking in a gentle spring breeze filled with indescribable joy. However, Sarah's sacred identity was like an invisible shackle tightly binding her yearning heart. As a pastor, she bore a special mission entrusted by God, and her life was already closely linked to the church's destiny, like a vine clinging to an ancient oak tree. But the flames of love, once ignited, are like untamed wild horses, difficult to subdue. Sarah began, like a devout believer, to try and suppress the stirrings in her heart with the discipline of reason. But each resistance was like adding fuel to the fire, causing that emotion to erupt, like a volcano, even more intense. She deeply loved her faith and regarded her role in the church as the glory of her life, but she also yearned for a secular happiness that belonged solely to her, untainted by any religious responsibility, like longing to breathe free air. In the depths of her soul, she began to question painfully, did becoming a devout pastor mean giving up the right to have love and a family? After countless sleepless nights, Sarah finally mustered the courage, as steadfast as a pilgrim, and confessed the turbulent emotions within her to the church leadership. Her decision was like a boulder thrown into a calm lake, causing a great uproar within the church. Some were moved by her sincere feelings and expressed understanding and support, while others, as if their faith had been defiled, felt deep disappointment and disbelief. Doubts, like invisible sharp swords, pierced her once highly respected soul. Ultimately, Sarah made a difficult decision in her life that felt like the sky falling and the earth cracking. For the sake of that pure, dawn-like love, she resolutely chose to resign from her sacred pastoral duties, like breaking the bond that connected her to the holy sanctuary, and return to ordinary secular life. This decision was a violent earthquake in the depths of her soul, meaning she would give up everything familiar, bid farewell to the altar where she had dedicated her youth and passion, and embrace a new life, filled with unknowns and challenges. She was like a brave explorer, stepping resolutely into uncharted territory. Sarah and David, this pair of lovers, who had repeatedly tested the boundaries between faith and the secular world finally broke through the many obstacles and came together. They held a simple and warm wedding in a quiet corner of the town, like two wandering stars finally finding each other's gravity, beginning their shared journey through life. Although Sarah no longer wore the pastor's robe, her heart, full of love and care, never stopped beating. She continued to actively participate in community volunteer activities using her unique way, like sowing seeds of hope to pass on love and care to everyone in need. She finally found her own happiness and used her choice to prove to the world that faith and love are not always incompatible. Perhaps they can find a way to coexist harmoniously in the light of humanity. Sarah's story, like the melodious chimes of the town church bells, lingered in the local community for a long time, sparking a profound discussion about the essence of faith, the true meaning of love, and the right to personal choice. It was like a shooting star across the night sky, breaking through people's fixed perceptions and reminding them that even souls bearing a special mission should have the right to pursue personal happiness, that yearning from the depths of the heart, like another devout call to God. And perhaps true love can also, in an unexpected and vibrant way, become another moving manifestation of faith in the secular world.
The clergy's entanglements of passion.
Women return to secular life more easily than men. After all, upon returning, a woman's role is often centered around supporting her husband, raising children, and managing household affairs, which are relatively easy to take on. Men, on the other hand, bear the heavy economic responsibility of supporting a family upon returning. Since male clergy typically come from seminary and are theological scholars lacking practical skills for competitive secular life, they find it difficult to survive once they leave their religious orders. Marriage might bring temporary happiness, but it is by no means a long-term solution. Marriage for male clergy definitely has more disadvantages than advantages. The clergy is a lofty position, unsuitable for warm-hearted women, but perhaps suited for cold-blooded ones. However, if a woman is cold-blooded, she will certainly find it difficult to fulfill the compassionate duties of this role. If male pastors have a divorce,
The clergy's entanglements of passion.
women return to secular life more easily than men. After all, upon returning, a woman's role is often centered around supporting her husband, raising children, and managing household affairs, which are relatively easy to take on. Men, on the other hand, bear the heavy economic responsibility of supporting a family upon returning. Since male clergy typically come from seminary and are theological scholars lacking practical skills for competitive secular life, they find it difficult to survive once they leave their religious orders. Marriage might bring temporary happiness, but it is by no means a long-term solution. Marriage for male clergy definitely has more disadvantages than advantages. The clergy is a lofty position, unsuitable for warm-hearted women, but perhaps suited for cold-blooded ones. However, if a woman is cold-blooded, she will certainly find it difficult to fulfill the compassionate duties of this role. If male pastors have a divorce rate similar to the secular world half, female pastors have a return to secular life rate similar to nuns half, then where would the church's reputation be, and how could it bear such a situation? As the saying goes, marriage is the grave of love. For the clergy, marriage will certainly be sweet at first, then bitter, briefly sweet followed by prolonged bitterness. Therefore, marriage for the clergy and for female clergy is like a gambling game with an extremely high risk factor. So, what to do requires rational consideration.